Hello again. And today we're going to continue our conversations about collaborative program planning by introducing the idea of embedding evaluative thinking throughout the program planning process. We're going to be talking about the reasons programs fail. We'll introduce evaluative thinking. What is it? And then we'll think about how evaluative thinking can help us learn throughout the life of a program. Now, what we're not going to discuss is evaluation to evaluate intervention effectiveness, evaluation methods to guide intervention improvement. And the reason for that is that Dr. Rhonda Zaycox will be presenting this content, and I know it'll be great because Rhonda is a very experienced evaluator. So let's jump in. Why do interventions fail? You know, we start off with this great idea about what we're going to do, and sometimes we get it done and sometimes we don't. So let's just take a moment to look at modifiable barriers to implementation of effective IVP programs. How about you read them to yourself, and I'll give you a bit of space to do that. Perhaps the one I might comment on is working in a vacuum, i.e. we get going, we start doing what we do, we don't pay attention to anybody around us, and we just keep going to the end. And in the meantime, the world has been turning around us and things have been changing. So that is a potential challenge. And that is also in itself a risk factor for turf wars. And turf wars are situations where we have people in settings who are both invested in addressing the issue. They're not working together, they're not collaborating, but people feel very passionately about it. And turf wars are a real missed opportunity because the tragedy is people don't fight about things they don't care about. So if we find ourselves in a turf war, it's because there are people who care, are invested, but are not collaborating. But there is one modifiable barrier to implementation of effective IVP programs that is possibly, more powerful than the others. And which one do you think that is? Well, of course, we're talking about evaluative thinking, so probably you know that I'm going to say inadequate or absent evaluation. And what I mean by that is not that we're not doing evaluation, but that we're doing it at the wrong time, or we're not doing enough of it, or we're not doing it soon enough. So let's have a little look then at how we might address that challenge. Where is it that evaluation is usually located in the programmatic process? Now, there's a big clue on the slide because it finds itself in box 3. So if you think about it, we have the typical cycle. We do our surveillance and our data collection. We assess the problem, we identify the causes, we put in place an intervention and evaluation, and then we decide about scale up in terms of effective programs and policies. All right, well, that's where it usually is. Let's ask this question then. Where can problems happen in the programmatic process? Are they only confined to box 3? No, they're not, unfortunately. And so here's the issue. We're using the evaluation questions in the 3rd box, but problems can happen at any point in the process. And this brings us to evaluative thinking. Evaluative thinking is a term that was coined by Michael Quinn Patton. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Michael Quinn Patton's. He's written numerous books on evaluation and qualitative methodologies. And you may know him for his work both in developmental evaluation and also utilization-focused evaluation, which is really a radical concept that we should design evaluations that are usable and useful. But Dr. Quinn Patton defined evaluative thinking as this. He says evaluative thinking is not just limited to evaluation projects. It's an analytical way of thinking that infuses everything that goes on. And this is the most important piece, I believe, of his definition. Evaluative thinking, I beg your pardon, is a willingness to ask, how do we know what we think we know? Let me repeat that. how do we know what we think we know? And so evaluative thinking is most protective to programs when we use it at all stages of program design, implementation, and dissemination. So our goal then is to embed evaluative questions in every step of the process. So at a minimum, when we're in the surveillance and data collection piece of our program, we're asking ourselves, have we asked the right questions? Have we defined the real problem? And have we checked? And then, have we identified modifiable critical factors, causal factors, predisposing factors, enabling and reinforcing factors? Have we identified protective factors and risk factors? And how do we know that we were right when we identified those? And then when we develop our interventions, we're asking ourselves, what works and for whom? Who should be delivering these interventions? What are the costs, the risks, the benefits, and the potential to sustain the impact? And then finally, how do we take effective and promising interventions to scale? And how do we demonstrate, larger scale impact and sustained impact? So a lot of important questions that we should be asking on our way through. So this is another concept that I want to introduce to us today. And that is that one of the challenges I think many of us have is that we expect to try something or design something and have it work for us. But the reality is that often we fail. We may not fail absolutely, but we fail to really achieve the impact that we want. And it can be really demoralizing for us. And that's why some people don't like evaluation, because they don't like to realize from the data that we haven't done a great job. But here's the thing, that when we fail and we fail wisely, when we are assessing what we're doing and we're learning about the things that are working, which is great, or the things that are not working, that provides an opportunity for us to try it again, to adjust, to try it again and succeed. And so I actually like this graphic that I have up for you, which is we can look at failure as a first attempt in learning. Now, I'm not suggesting that we keep imposing failing programs on communities, because they are not our experimental community, but that we not be afraid of failure. What is a problem is if we fail silently, or if we fail without having the information available to us to understand why. And part of evaluative thinking is constantly asking the questions that will help us understand what's going on, what we're doing well, and what we might need to pay some more attention to. So one of the things that I like to do is, instead of thinking about a program just as 4 big chunks, I like to think about the program as 8 pieces. And I want to give credit to Rhonda Zaycox here again, because many years ago, she and I kind of drew this out when we were presenting a workshop on evaluation. So if you think about it, programs officially have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? We have the design phase, the implementation phase, and the outcomes phase, or the outcome evaluation phase. But if you think about it, there are at least 8 steps. So we have a part of our program where we're thinking about what's the problem, how are we defining it, how are we measuring it? What's the integrity of the diagnosis that we're making here? Are we sure? Have we been comprehensive about what actually is going on in the diagnoses that we've come to? How rigorous was our intervention selection strategy? What's the quality of our plan? We can have a thrown together plan, or we have a very intentional plan that perhaps we have shared with colleagues, or even better, developed with colleagues. How have we mobilized the resources to be able to do the program? How are we monitoring the quality while the program is in the field? And how responsive are we? So how reactive are we to what's going on? How adaptive are we? And also, how proactive are we in our program responsiveness? And finally, we make a decision about, do we continue to institutionalize this and expand this program, sustain it? Or something we don't talk about as often is, should this program be continued or should we dissolve it because it's not as helpful to us? And what I'd like you to think about here is that every one of these 8 steps has a beginning, a middle, and an end. We design that step, we monitor it, and it has an end. So while we're doing intervention selection, how do we design our intervention selection process? How do we implement it? Do we implement it the way we said we would? So is it really evidence informed? Are we really considering multiple options? And at the end of it, are we confident that we have an evidence-informed strategy? If we don't, anything we do beyond that point is going to be compromised. So using this evaluative thinking, which is how do we know what we think we know about this step? And how do we know that the decisions we've made are correct? This is unbelievably protective thinking throughout the life of a program. And this also aligns with a concept we see in the business literature. This is a term that Dr. Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School coined many years ago. I'm a fan of Amy Edmondson's as well. She's done a lot of work on teaming and on psychological safety and creativity and organizational responsiveness. But execution as learning means operating in a way that allows organizations to learn as they go. It means that the work groups or entire companies can adjust, improvise, or innovate while at the same time successfully delivering products or services. And this is the piece that I'm wanting to point to today. Execution as learning is a way of operating that is deliberately and consciously iterative, where action and reflection go hand in hand. So now if you think about it, we've now encountered 3 thought leaders. In one of our earlier talks, we encountered Edgar Schein, who speaks to us about the importance of humble curiosity and how we need to approach every situation with that genuine intention to learn about what it is we don't know. We then heard from Michael Quinn Patton about evaluative thinking and from Amy Edmondson about the importance of having an execution as learning strategy where we go into design and implementation expecting to learn, expecting to adapt, and expecting to change. And so what we're recommending here as we embed evaluative thinking is that we're committing to humble curiosity and this multi-layered reflective strategy throughout the entire program. And if you're not sure what this image is of, it's of the light spectrum. And I like to think of this kind of thinking as something that sheds light on our program throughout the life of a program. Yes, but okay, where do I start? People always say this to me. They say, Carolyn, this sounds great in theory, but how am I actually going to do it in practice? Well, here are some ideas. We've actually already started because we start with evaluative questions asked early and often. And we've done that with the MSIM already in this session, and we've done it with a revised intervention decision matrix, or actually we've done it already. And this is when we ask ourselves, which questions do we need to ask and why? Who's being asked the questions? How are we asking them? When are we asking them? Why are we asking them? Who's doing the asking? Because that makes a difference. And how and when and why are they engaging with the audiences to ask those questions? And then also importantly, are there any sources of evidence that we could use to answer the questions that we have? Now, when all else fails and you're out of ideas for the questions that we need to be asking about our program, try this fill in the gap, need to know wish list technique. And I believe this, I first saw this in one of Dr. Quinn Patton's textbooks. Don't use the evaluation word. Just create this I would love to know list. If we knew this, it would help us do this. If we knew who else is invested in addressing this injury and violence prevention initiative, it would help us build a partnership of invested individuals and organizations. And so draw it up, put it on pieces of paper. Don't feel that just because you come up with a question, you have to ask or answer all of them, but just brainstorm and come up with all the questions that you think would be helpful to you. Remembering this is not a burden. This is about helping you with your work. And so, friends, we come to the end of this little module. And what I want to say is that improving our programs through evaluative thinking is never linear. We're going to be going backwards and forwards the whole time. But please try it out. Enjoy the journey and the discoveries that will come to you when you embed evaluative thinking in your program planning work. Thank you for joining me.